Okay, so um, after the presidency of Ronald Reagan, we have the presidency of George H. Bush. Okay, George H.W. Bush. This is the senior George Bush, who recently passed away. He had been involved in the CIA prior to becoming Reagan's vice president. He is measured, he is calm, he is cool, he seems like he has it together. He rides this wave of Reagan's two-term popularity into office. And he wins election. Now, he'll be a one-term president in part because George H.W. Bush really wants to focus on foreign policy, and he really has to focus on the economy. And many people feel he falls short when it comes to the economy. Also, he just gets caught up in this wave of popularity of Bill Clinton, and there's not much he can do against that. But a few of the foreign policy things that he has to deal with as president. First of all, Somalia is facing a humanitarian crisis. And so there is this UN operation called Operation Restore Hope that the United States is a part of, where we send humanitarian aid to refugees in Somalia. China brutally deals with the protests in Tiananmen Square by actually sending in tanks to respond to these protests, and George H.W. Bush has to deal with the fallout of that, where they condemn the Chinese response but still maintain diplomatic relationships with China. And then in 1989, the United States will actually invade Panama and replace the president. President Manuel Noriega will be arrested and taken to the United States to face drug charges. We'll restructure the Panamanian government. So we definitely are going to become involved in a lot of places around the world. And we're going to play a little bit of Peacekeeper here. This is just a little video clip of the tanks in Tiananmen Square. Eventually, that guy starts climbing on the tank, and it's pretty wild. In 1990, Saddam Hussein invades Kuwait. This is going to be what causes the Persian Gulf War. The United States will lead a U.S. coalition, a United Nations coalition, into Kuwait and demand that Iraq withdraw. The refusal leads to Operation Desert Storm, which begins with an air attack, followed quickly by a ground invasion. 100 days later, Iraq is forced to withdraw from Kuwait, but Saddam Hussein is not replaced. Many years later, this will, prove to be a potential mistake. We'll also say that we've talked about Vietnam as being sort of the first war where journalists there are really embedded with the soldiers. Desert Storm, the Persian Gulf War, is the first maybe live streamed. I don't know if live stream is not a thing, but live broadcast war, where you could turn on a 24-hour news network like CNN and watch the bombs being dropped. I'm going to play a little video clip. And in the video clip, you are going to see Wolf Blitzer, very young, with dark hair, and it's kind of wild. If you watch CNN, you're going to be like, whoa.
Over the past century, the United States...
Pause that.
This is, something is happening outside. The skies over Baghdad have been illuminated. We're seeing bright flashes going off all over the sky.
The sky continues to be filled with tracers as the anti-aircraft weapons continue to fire. Another huge, loud burst from the ground. More tracers going up into the air over the city. And there's a lot of fire going up. And as I say, these bombs continue to come down occasionally on the ground here. There's no sign that any of the aircraft that are involved in this, not from Iraq, but from the Allied forces, have suffered any damage.
Pentagon officials say it should have come as no surprise that this attack started tonight. They say that the United States wanted to start the attack at night. There are specific targets. For almost 5.5 months. The United States has outlined virtually every strategic target in Iraq and occupied Kuwait.
Okay. Many years later, George W. Bush, the son of George H.W. Bush, will come back into Iraq, the second Iraq War. At that point, Saddam Hussein will be removed from power, and he will go into hiding for years and will be discovered living literally in a hole in the ground, and he will eventually be executed by the Iraqi people. I mentioned this economic slowdown caused in part because, remember, Reagan had started this crazy military spending. Well, when the Cold War ends in 1991, the military spending ends with it. And so a lot of those people who had gained government jobs lose those government jobs. And so you start to see a slowdown in military spending. Reagan has left a serious deficit. It leads to a need for debt repayment. Bush attempts to fix the recession, but failed. Bush had famously promised, quote unquote, no new taxes, and then he raises taxes. And also, the other thing that probably costs George H.W. Bush his reelection is this guy up here, Ross Perot, who is a serious third-party candidate, a surprisingly serious third-party challenger, a billionaire from Texas.
Read my lips. No new taxes. I will keep America moving forward, always forward, for a better America, for an endless, enduring dream and 1,000 points of light. This is my mission, and I will complete it.
And then this guy, of course, wins election against George H.W. Bush. He's this governor of Arkansas. He's going to emerge as this new way forward for Democrats in the 90s. And he appears on Arsenio Hall. I always like to play this clip. I mean, George H.W. Bush can't do that. What does Clinton do? The Clinton's domestic policies, the Brady Bill, which is a background check law for handguns, the Defense of Marriage Act, very controversial, defining marriage as a legal union between a man and a woman, with the word spouse referring to a person only of the opposite sex. This was seen as something that appeased those on the right who were concerned that Clinton was too liberal. The Family and Medical Leave Act, and by the way, the Defense of Marriage Act is what is overturned by the courts to make gay marriage legal. The Family and Medical Leave Act gave employees up to 12 weeks of job-protected unpaid leave for family and medical reasons. That's FMLA, if you've ever heard of FMLA. HIPAA, where patients' health information is private. Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act enacted new laws around the death penalty, hate crimes, firearms, sex crimes, and provided for the hiring of over 100,000 new police officers. The Taxpayer Relief Act, that's the crime, not the crime bill, but similar to. The Taxpayer Relief Act offered eligible taxpayers educational and retirement tax exemptions. So moving forward, this is where we're getting into a whole bunch of quick things that I think you might be asked about. Clinton is the country's first baby boomer president. It's this new era, as it says, of soul searching, free trade agreements. We've got NAFTA. We have to understand what America's role in the global economy is, and also in terms of foreign policy. Today, technological changes continue to have a dramatic effect on the American economy, raising the standard of living. New technology influences how and where people do their jobs. That's more true than ever. Have you noticed that there's this trend of people moving out of these larger, expensive cities like New York and moving to smaller, less expensive places like, for example, Tennessee? Many people are coming to Tennessee like this year because you can work from home now. So why am I gonna pay to live in an expensive city like San Francisco or New York when I can do my job from anywhere, including a nice cushy suburb, right? A lower percentage of Americans than ever before work on assembly lines or on farms. Instead, they work in the service industry. Union membership, it makes sense then if factory work is declining, union membership is also declining, which means the power and effectiveness of unions in politics is also declining. In 2000, we see an end to Clinton's 2 terms as president. He is one of the strongest presidents that we've ever had in terms of economic stability. But he's a scandalized president, and he really ushers in a much more dramatic era of polarized politics. October 17th, 2000, Republican candidate George W. Bush and Democratic candidate Al Gore. This is an image from October from their third and final presidential debate. And we will need to make sure that we understand that George W. Bush does win the election against Al Gore, but that the margin is razor thin. George W. Bush, kind of opposite from his father, George W. Bush wanted to deal with domestic policy. That was what his bread and butter was. But very quickly in 2001, he is going to have to deal with international and foreign policy, right? This is an image from 9/11. This is the North Tower of the World Trade Center on the left, already on fire when a second plane crashes into the South Tower on the right. And of course, that's what's going to define our nation for many, many years after. So we're going to make sure that we look at the Patriot Act as well, which is in your folder. After George W. Bush's 2 terms end in 2008, we see the election of President Obama, and President Obama will have to deal with the economy. He will have to deal with this massive recession from 2006 forward, really, and he will oversee the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, approved by Congress in 2009. It's a stimulus package that includes tax cuts, aids to state and local governments, and funds for infrastructure projects. At its best, it's considered a positive stimulus bill. At its worst, it's considered a bailout of banks and large corporations. As the 2012 presidential election approached, the nation's economy was still a concern. You see the emergence on the right of a Tea Party movement saying that Republicans were not conservative enough. And on the left, you see the emergence of the Occupy Wall Street movement, saying that Democrats had been too lenient towards big businesses. This is an image of Occupy Wall Street protesters. Voter turnout by age and ethnicity during the 2012 presidential election. And we know Obama wins the second term. This is just a little chart of immigration from 2000 to 2010. You can see over half of our immigrants are coming from the Americas. This is a chart of changing families. We're shrinking the number of kids we're having. We have less married couples from 1980 to 2010. More people who are living together and unmarried. People are waiting later to have children, but people are also living longer. I mentioned the Patriot Act. That's going to be in your folder. Come back to that. This is the presidential election map of 2000. I told you I'm just quickly hurrying through this. No Child Left Behind. Obama is going to also focus on climate change, climate action, increasing EPA regulations. It's an image of windmills, which do not cause cancer. This is just talking about increase in technology. I told you I'm moving through this pretty quick. And then in 2016, we see the election between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. The first months, because this is as far as I think that we could potentially go with Trump's presidency, so should say President Trump, marked by a host of executive orders aimed at rolling back some of the work of Obama's administration, specifically when it comes to the Supreme Court, immigration, EPA regulations, trade policies, health care, and just general opposition grows between Democrats and Republicans. All right, so that was a whirlwind. That was quick, but I think we hit some highlights, and we'll be talking more about this in class, and just reach out if you've got questions about anything.